Hey love, are you expecting a little one in April or later? My Friends and Nurse is opening enrollment for the February BirthLink membership cohort, and we would love you on board. This isn't just another birth preparation program. It's a comprehensive journey designed to support you from pregnancy through early parenthood. Our BirthLink membership is month to month, and we're going to dive deep into everything you need to know. You'll work through our extensive BirthLink course and gain exclusive access to masterclasses led by top experts. We're talking pediatricians, lactation consultants, physical therapists, experienced doulas, and other nurses just like me who will equip you with knowledge and confidence. Spots are limited in our February cohort, so please don't wait. Visit myfriendsnurse.com/February and secure your membership today. Your most informed and empowered birth experience starts here. Welcome to the BirthLink podcast. I'm so glad to have you here, friend. I just got back from India was like a week ago. I spent a week kind of holed up in like a cave, recalibrating from that journey. So really, it's been about a month that I've been away. I went 3 weeks to India, and with 5 of those days being in Thailand and Phuket, just because I needed to get away to a little 5-star resort, quiet. But most of that time was spent with family. We had a little reunion type thing. My husband's cousin, and my husband's from Mumbai. His cousin, his father's 75th birthday was going on. So he arranged and planned about 50 members of the family to come from all over the world to come visit and, celebrate. And so that was my first time going, and definitely Kaya's first time going. And it was such a crazy experience. Definitely core memories were made. And will I go back? Only if I have to. I think I got a taste of India, and thank you, but I'm good for right now. It was just it was overwhelming. It was like overstimulating. The noise, the traffic, the way they drive, the smog, I say noise again because it's very noisy. All of it, right? It's very tight, very densely populated, and it's a little much for me. I get a little anxious, so I have like a bit of claustrophobia from my past and things that I've gone through. But sometimes when there's just a lot of noise and people, crowds, I don't do well. I get panic attacks. Busy day at Disneyland, same thing. So I was scared. I was scared going into it about how I would react. My husband would just kind of prep me and tell me, but I'm like, I don't know if I want to go. I was like, people say like, oh, are you so excited to go? I mean, like, no, not really. I don't know how it's going to be. And I was really scared. But I prepared for it. I meditated on it. I knew what to expect. I was prepared with Kaya because I knew I was going to be on a 20-hour flight with her, going there and coming back. And I did the best I could to prepare. And that actually helped so much because I was able to be way more calm, way more present. I knew when to take time to separate myself, and everybody knew. So if I put my headphones in or I went to another room and to be alone, they got it. Because not only was India itself really crowded, but there's like 50 people in and out, of these 2 apartments. And then we went to this villa, and there was just like everybody was there. So it's a lot of people. So I really needed to have my tools ready to go, and it helped immensely. So today our episode is going to be a long one. It's a wonderful discussion that we have with Clara O'Rourke. Clara's from Harvard, Massachusetts, and she runs a Clear Light Birth. I don't know if you follow her on Instagram or Facebook, but she is a doula and researcher and all things birth. And she's very active in the queer community, and she's neurodivergent. So she brings a lot of thought and mindfulness from those communities, which I've really, really appreciated. And as if you're a birth worker, if you are pregnant, if you're just a person in the world, it's something that you want to be aware of. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. We really get into fear and how to combat that. So that was my little segue from India. It's kind of it's similar, right? You're going into birth, you're going into a hospital environment, or maybe you're doing a home birth, but the hospital is always an option, I guess you say, or it might happen. So you want to go prepared. Go prepared. So how we discuss fear and how it's really transformed the infrastructure. It's how it's kind of affected our passion for birth, how it has affected doctors and nurses and how they treat, how they intervene, their recommendations, all of that stuff. How is fear associated with birth? And we get into that, right? How are we going to advocate for ourselves in this kind of system, right? How do we plan and prepare for birth when it wants to be run for us, right? We have this doctor that we put as a pilot when in actuality, we are the pilot. You as a birthing person is the pilot. How are you going to fly that plane? She gets into that analogy. I really love it. I hope you enjoy this episode. Stay with me. I know it's a long one, but go for a walk or a drive or listen and clean the house. Listen 15-minute increments if you need to, but it's going to give you a lot of tools and insight, and it's thought-provoking, which I think is what a podcast should be, right? If you have any questions about this episode or you want to discuss anything that you've heard, you know where to find me. But for right now, let's get into it. Welcome to the Birthling Podcast, presented by My Friend's a Nurse. I'm your host, Clara, a high-risk labor and delivery nurse right here in sunny California. I'm also an OB certified specialist, birth educator, lactation expert, and mother of 2 beautiful daughters. I am passionate about guiding you through the miraculous journey of pregnancy and childbirth, using evidence and history and asking the reason why. I have some incredible medical friends and colleagues, and we're all here to help you navigate this often overwhelming birthing hospital system in the United States. My goal is to gain trust in birth, improve this system, and provide some valuable insights. Let's make this journey a little less daunting and a lot more joyful. Let's get into it. Hey, Clara. Welcome to the Birthling Podcast. Thank you so much for coming. We just finished my interview with you. Thank you so much. How are you? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Colette. I'm a huge fan of the work that you've been doing, and I'm so excited that we've connected. It's such an honor to be on the Birthlink podcast today.
Yes, you are a doula yourself and an educator. You are influenced, I should say, in social media and online as such. And I am such a fan, and I definitely respect everything that you do for your clients and for the community and just for a society in general. I think the more that we put good information out there, the more empowered we will all be in a system that feels kind of like it's stealing it away from us. And it's not anymore. I feel like we're changing the narrative a little bit by doing this kind of work. So thank you. I know you were a researcher before this. What kind of stuff did you research? Like, what made you get into birth work?
Yeah, so it's a kind of winding road to get into birth work, and I had postponed pursuing it because I was interested and fascinated about it for a long time, but on a totally different career trajectory. So I started my career in doing educational research, really focused on equity, engaging immigrant families, supporting English learners, multilingual learners, things of that nature. I had seen the documentary The Business of Being Born, which I think came out in like 2010.
Yeah, Ricky.
And before that documentary, I was absolutely terrified of birth, like absolutely terrified. My experience and understanding of birth was just from health class in high school, where we saw like the Miracle of Life video and the language that my peers, especially like male peers, used around the body after birth, the language around tearing, around pooping during birth, around pain. It was all negative. And I was kind of like, ooh, like I'd rather just like plan a cesarean and not have to worry about all of that. ironically, fast forward years later, I'm like a birth doula and supporting people have totally empowering birth experience. And that can look a lot of different ways. But I saw the business of being bored when I was I think in college and was like, wow, birth is kind of the best kept secret. Like it is this absolutely empowering life event, but people are kind of being stripped of their autonomy and pressured into all of these things. And seeing the hospital system writ large as a system that's not in the business of empowering birthing people, but a lot of times in the process of controlling and medicalizing birth. And so the advocate in me was really curious about doula work. The interpersonal person in me was also curious about birth work. I'm neurodivergent, I'm autistic, and I think my superpowers in being neurodivergent are I am a research nerd and I love information sharing, but I'm also like turn up on the empathy scale. So I really enjoy working one on one with people and I love sharing information. So eventually when the pandemic hit and I was feeling unfulfilled by being a researcher and communicating helpful information that wasn't being used by another not so great system, which is our education system, to improve learning, I was like, you know what? This is not where I'm making impact. I'm going to feel more in purpose by actually pursuing my dream of becoming a doula. And I trained to be a doula and launched my own business, started to do it as a part-time gig and then started to do it full-time. And I haven't looked back. I absolutely love working with expectant families. It is such an incredible and empowering time. And I love supporting people in the journey of like stepping into their power in such a transformational way. And I love blending both the evidence, and I think this is where we get along really well, is we're both kind of nerds and like want to know what the research is saying, but then also support people in their personal growth to show up in their authenticity. And so I kind of blend research and mindfulness practices so that people not only are feeling informed, but they're feeling grounded in their decision making, they're feeling grounded in their values, their understanding of self, their autonomy, and transform themselves not only for their birth experience, but for their life writ large, right? I had a client text me like, all your mindfulness stuff is really helping during this week, in processing kind of like the stress of we're recording this like right after the election happened, right? So like it's been helpful for me to like process information, right? Or I had another client who celebrated their baby's first birthday. Like being a parent and using these mindfulness strategies while my baby's having a breakdown is amazing. So that's a long-winded way to say I have come to this work because it is something that I think my heart called me to do for a really long time. I finally listened to that call and I couldn't be happier doing the work that I do to help people recognize how powerful they are in a really pivotal moment in their lives.
Amazing. Yeah, I always say like they're like, "Well, how did you know you want to go into OB?" Because when I went into nursing school, there was like I knew I wanted to help deliver babies for a living, and now I'm moving away and saying help people give birth, but at the time it's deliver babies. But I always say I'm like it's like knowing like getting married and knowing that person is the one. It's like you said, it's a calling. There's something, is a switch turns on in you and you can't turn it off, because birth is just crazy, and I want to say miraculous, right? Just like how it's all done and all these parts are moving, and what happens to a person internally as they create another life, and what happens to them, and how our body works to do that. It's just like freaking fascinating.
It's
And
incredible.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And so, that sparks the fire in us to want to work with people that are going through this, right? And then and then we get to the actual infrastructure of birth, right? So you watch something like A Business of Being Born. Is that what the one? Yeah, A Business of Being
Yes,
Born.
a business of being born.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't know why I said it on my mouth, and I was like, that didn't sound right. Okay, yes, A Business Being Born, and we're like, hold up, what? Like, what do they mean? What is going on? And then all of a sudden, it's creating this like mistrust and then fear behind birth, and then it's the narrative from people that may be ignorant and naive about our bodies, like male young men and women that, or any gender, right, that don't understand how the body is actually working, how maybe you could tear but the body repairs itself, and how it's meant to del- give birth to a baby. And then all of a sudden we're making decisions based on fear because of this infrastructure, and all of a sudden we're kind of getting, I feel like we're getting like more and more restricted, right? So that we're not able to really embody everything that sparked us, all the everything that sparked us in the beginning. I'm sorry if I'm going off. I guess we've been talking for a while, but yeah, that spark that got us to love birth and understand it. All of a sudden, just like that spark got kind of put out by this infrastructure and these policies and these procedures, and we spoke a lot about that on your podcast today, right? So, and then you spoke about like a more, that we're totally into evidence-based and learning the whys behind why we do things, and but then we want individualized care, right? That kind of brings you as a person, because you're the one that's going to be transformed. You're the one having this baby and then bringing it home, and now your whole future is changed. So what happens during pregnancy is going to carry over into the rest of your life, right?
Exactly. And I think a lot of times through our media, through the way that we talk about birth in our society, through the sometimes unhealthy healing process of people who may have experienced trauma in their birth and how they choose to share that with people who are pregnant, right? We get a lot of messages in our lives that paint what can feel like a really scary picture of what birth is. And we aren't told the good story. We aren't told that birth can actually be something that changes your life for the better. And that even if it is challenging, it can be the catalyst to your greatest growth moments. And when you prepare intentionally, it can actually be the most transformational part of your existence and your experience as a human. Now, I see people, and I think it's in big part because these are the big things our society focuses on, right? There's the fear of tearing, there's the fear of pain, there's the fear of pooping, and there's the fear of like general unknown and the fear of losing control, right? And I think the fear of tearing and the fear of pooping come from the media, and pain, right? All of those things are like really, really hyped up, right? We're focusing on like minor elements, like the tearing element is mostly misinformation and understanding like what the body is capable of doing. And I have an ebook specific about how to avoid it, but also understanding it better so that you're not scared about it. But when it comes to like the narrative of like pooping, right? Like this is our society shaming what your body might naturally do and like focusing on the negative, not the powerful, right? I a lot of times I ask folks to reflect on their birth fears and understand, get curious, like where are these coming from, right? And like the fear of pooping, I think a lot of times for people is like the fear of like losing control, the fear of not being desirable by your partner or like anyone who might see you or witness you in that. But like we're focusing as a society about parts of birth that we can make degrading. We're not focusing on the parts of birth that are actually the big, pivotal, memorable parts of birth, which are how you step into your power, how you advocate for your desires, how you lead by being so strong in your conviction that you recognize that the rest of your life, you're not just going to be a pushover. You're going to stand up for what you care about and what you value, right? But I think a lot of folks still have this like looming sense of uncertainty even after they think they're like making choices that are going to lead to the birth that they want, right? And I think a lot of that is the fear of uncertainty and the unknown, because I always tell people we can't plan birth, but we can plan for birth, right? You don't actually know how it's going to unfold because you have 50%, right? You can do everything in your power to prepare for the birth experience you want and optimize that. And then your baby has 50%. Like, we can't control what your baby chooses to do, right? But when you are able to know your options and create birth preferences and various plans for, okay, like this is the ideal spontaneous labor, like spontaneous vaginal birth. What if I choose induction as the path that feels right for me? Or what if, we result in an unplanned cesarean, or sometimes I refer to as belly birth, right? Like, what are those options? And so I'm going into my birth experience knowing how to pivot if I need to, right? I always say, like, if you were to get on a plane and you had a pilot who knew that they were going to be navigating through a storm, right? Would you prefer the pilot who was like, well, storms are unpredictable, so I'm just not going to plan for this one. I'm just going to wing it. Or would you rather be flying with a pilot who is like, you know what, storms are unpredictable, but I'm going to create some key plans for the ways that I think things could pan out so that if I do have to pivot, I kind of know how I'm going to navigate, right? Who would you feel safer with? Who would you feel more confident with? Now, you are the pilot. Like, you can choose, do I want to navigate in a way where I'm feeling informed and I know how to pivot, or do I want to just go with the flow and kind of move through things? And again, it is your choice on how you want to navigate birth, but I will guarantee that for most people, the more empowering route is the curious one, where you get curious, you have an idea of what options will be presented to you before the critical moment. And then when those options are presented and you have to pivot in some scenario, you feel really grounded and good. You're not drinking from a fire hose of new information while you're also trying to breathe through a contraction, right? You're like, okay, I talked about this. I kind of know that this feels good as like the next step, right? Or I anticipated I was going to need to have this conversation with my provider. I feel good about this, right?
And it's also being being responsible for being the pilot, like taking on that
Yes.
role.
Radical responsibility.
So many
Yes.
people are perfectly okay with just being the passenger. Like, listen, I don't know how, I love that analogy, by the way, but so many people are like, there's no way that I'm going to learn how to fly a plane. So I'm going to go ahead and sit in the back and you tell me what to do. Okay, you want me to buckle my seat? I will buckle my seatbelt. Okay, I'm put my phone on airplane mode. I'll just do everything you tell me to do. And I'm just going to watch a movie and enjoy the ride and hope that I land there safely. They want to be the passenger, and they're going to hand that pilot role over to their doctor or their nurse. And that is how the hospital kind of wants you to feel because they don't trust you to fly that plane. They're like, what do you know? And the second you start asking questions, you're just going to be that person like poking their head in the cockpit like, what you doing? What's the next plan? Where are we going? How much longer until we get there? And now you're just like, oh, they're annoying. Like, let us fly the plane. Let us handle your birth, right? And we have to. But then that's how planes crash, and all of a sudden you're the victim, and that's it. Like, you're gonna, whether there's, the plane's shaky and there's turbulence and, things are delayed and whatnot, it's out of your control all of a sudden. And what makes birth like something that should be out of your control when your body has designed and raised this developing fetus into this baby, and now all of a sudden birth comes along and you're like, okay, take the wheel. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, it does involve education and taking that responsibility to know that no, your body is doing this. You are the one in control. At the end of the day, you're the one going home with the consequences. So what does that entail? And to not be scared of it, to
Right.
embrace it. Right.
Yeah.
And as a structure, and I'm so glad like we have people like you and that are speaking up and empowering people to take on that role, because you don't have to know everything. I just told you, like, I've been studying this, and I probably spend 60 hours a week studying birth, and I'm still learning something new every day. You're not going to learn everything that you need to know. You're not.
And nor do you need to learn
Nor do you need to
everything, right?
know.
And I think with you bring up such a great point, is a lot of people just want to be a passenger. And I want you to hear me loud and clear if you're listening to this podcast. You deciding to be a passenger is not going to lead to an easier time if things don't go according to plan, right? Sometimes you just want to be able to blame your provider if something doesn't happen in the way that you wanted it to, so you don't have to take on the responsibility for your decisions. But it's not going to make you feel better having abdicated your decision making to someone else. Like that is not going to make you feel great. And there's very clear research. There's a great study that was done in 2017 that really unpacked the nuances of why people had experienced birth trauma. And there are four main reasons, and none of them have to actually do with birth outcomes. So if you're feeling like, I don't want to control my birth experience because I don't want to be responsible for the outcome, that's not what leads to a traumatic experience, right? The main reasons are because you felt like you lost control over your decision making in your birth process. Other people have reported having a fear for their baby's well-being, right? Which I find kind of ridiculous, because it's very rare for, like, in birth should be something that, like, most of the time is just like uncomplicated, right?
It's a
And
core,
most
like, fear, though, and it never
right.
goes away, by the way. Like, my daughter's 23,
Yes.
and I still, like, something bad, it doesn't matter if it's like a minuscule amount, is probably, as a parent, our greatest fear. And now we're
Right.
putting
Right.
ourselves in that situation where that greatest fear could possibly occur. And it has, and it does. So, you know,
Yeah.
I can totally understand, but then that means, like, just scared. I don't want to be responsible for something that.
Right, right. But having that fear that baby is not doing well, I think sometimes also comes from, like, false alarms, like, or miscommunication about, like, baby's heart rate, or, just like stress of, like, is this normal, right? Where those things could be quelled very easily, right? When you're not in, like, a hyper fear based environment. Other people have reported trauma because of their ability or struggles to cope with the sensations, right? And they weren't prepared on how to navigate the intensity of labor waves and navigate that well, and what their options were for pain management. And then the fourth reason is because they didn't get proper communication around interventions from their caregiver, right? And that, like, is about the cascade of interventions. Like, okay, well, you talked about the risks and benefits, or maybe you didn't, excuse me, about this particular intervention, but you didn't tell me that this intervention was going to lead to maybe the lack of mobility for me, or not be like being told I can't eat anymore, or all of these other like having to be on a blood pressure cuff and needing to have, like, a heart rate monitor, like all these different things, right? I didn't realize that saying yes to this is kind of saying yes to, like, 7 other things, right? So when you're scared about being the pilot and you want to be the passenger, recognize that two elements, like two of the key reasons why people experience traumatic births, is one, because they actually didn't feel in control of their decision making because they decided to be the passenger, and two, probably because they were in passenger energy throughout their birth, didn't feel like they actually knew their options or how to ask for information about their options from their provider, and kind of got interventions and didn't really know how to navigate those well.
That's great. I'll look that study up too. There's a few studies that are similar. And I do want to add, sometimes you do have the right mindset and you do speak up, and then they ignore you, or they disrespect you, or they completely blindside, like, gaslight you. So that is also going to be so hard. And then you're like, well, would I even bother if they're not even going to listen to me anyways? Like, why should I even try? I just want to. I think we really want to trust our doctors. We really want to trust our team to be able to handle it, that they've gone to medical school or midwifery school or, nursing school, and they've set up these policies and these rules for my best interest. So I really just want to trust that they have my best interest at heart. But if you don't come as an individual, how are they going to know that a blood pressure cuff would be bothering you every 30 minutes? How are they going to know that you don't like, that you have a tremendous fear of an IV, and, starting Pitocin is going to, oh, we can't give you Pitocin and have an induction. They've been talking about induction with you all along, but you didn't realize that you need an IV or whatever the case may be, right? So
Mhm.
you have to be
Mhm.
able to speak up for yourself. So let's get into how you do that with your clients. Like how then, okay, you're going to be the passenger. What's the best route then? What are some tips to then build a birth plan or start communicating with your provider so that you can learn the basics of 101 so that you can speak up?
Yeah. So I think the first step is knowing your options, right? There's a really great quote from, I believe it's the book A Good Birth, A Safe Birth, that says, if you don't know your options, you don't have any, right? So, like, you can't go into a birth experience with like a see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, like mindset and feel like you're going to come out of a hospital system that's kind of broken and like feel like you knew what was going on the whole time, right? Understanding what options are going to be presented to you is the very first step, right? And once you know those options, understanding which ones you feel good about and which ones you need to have a conversation about, right? So the first step is knowing what do I even need to know about? And I think for a lot of people this is starting with taking a comprehensive childbirth education class, right? Like you can do a lot of independent research and there's a lot of information out there. But I think a lot of people spend so much time consuming conflicting information because a lot of stuff that's out there is opinion based, right? Like there's this whole birth binary out there. That's what I like to call it,
Oh,
is some people say
100%.
like you have to have the unmedicated, no intervention, quote unquote natural birth. All birth is natural. And that is the only good way to give birth. Or you have the other end of the spectrum, which is like get all the interventions, just listen to your provider, right? And I had a client say, I just want to live somewhere in the middle confidently,
And I
right?
think most
But
most of us do, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think with that, it's important to realize that in order to exist confidently, you need to know what you're going to be presented with and trying to do independent research where you can find like, is this article actually something I can trust or is this opinion, right? Like finding a high quality childbirth class where you can understand what your options are. And they're actually like, they include a discussion of interventions, right? Like I typically tell people avoid the classes that are offered by the hospital, right? They tend to be shorter, they tend to be big groups, they tend to not go in depth about intervention or talk really clearly about how interventions are presented at said hospital, right? So, taking a course that helps you understand one, what to expect and what your options are is really helpful. And then from there, crafting your birth preferences of, okay, well, now I know that these are the things that will likely be presented to me. This is how I want to proceed with this. And as you're learning those things, you don't have to have a finalized birth plan. As you're starting to learn about these different things, like do I want a HEP block or IV fluids? Do I want to have cervical exams or how often do I want to have them? Start asking your provider and talking with them about what the typical practices are at your hospital. Talk to them about what your preferences are and start to engage in a dialogue so that you are crafting your birth plan. You're starting to understand your options and potentially if you're working with a doula, right, like talking with them as well because they'll provide you helpful information in that journey, right? So the first step is to know your options. The second is to kind of decide what you want to do. And then the third is to start actually effectively communicating those and advocating for those. So like the next step is that those conversations with your provider, understanding how to advocate for them. And I'm going to plug, we just had an amazing conversation on the Mindful Womb podcast with Colette, who talks specifically about all of these incredible mindful advocacy strategies, but effective communication strategies that you can utilize, right, to start to have conversations about your birth preferences. Because it's not all about just saying, these are my preferences, this is all I want, like this is what we're doing, my way or the highway. It's understanding like how to talk with your provider, listen to their perspective, and then assert what your preferences are in an autonomous and clear and empathetic way, in figuring out how to navigate that and navigate hospital policy effectively, right? Yeah. So it's not just like knowing your options, but it's navigating, okay, now I know that this is what I'm interested in. How do I put this into practice? And I think sometimes people are like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to take the childbirth class that tells me what to expect on the phases of labor and like breathing techniques. And
They're
then
asking
the
me for a
rest.
Lamaze. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I love that, but what about what's the other basics you got to know?
Right. And I always joke like breath technique, it's just so old school to be teaching you to like pant during your like pushing phase, like there are some techniques for breathing, but it's like you don't need to solely focus on that. Like there's so much more that goes into preparing for birth. So I think a lot of people just want to know the basics of what to expect in terms of the labor process. And then they don't get curious on really understanding options and interventions, because maybe they took a class that was like, yeah, this is your, again, using air quotes here, natural birth. And we don't talk anything about interventions. And then you walk into triage and 3 interventions have been presented to you within 5 minutes. And you're like, my birth's not going according to plan. I feel so underprepared.
And you don't even know what an intervention looks like. Like, what is an intervention? It could be something so minor that just starts the cascade. To me, as soon as you walk through, as soon as you walk through the hospital, that's an intervention.
Intervention 1, because you're changing your environment, right? You went
Yeah.
from the comfort of your own home to a different environment. And our environment, like our bodies are wired to keep us safe, right? And when we talk about, and I talked a little bit about fear earlier, right? Understanding what your fears are and unpacking them and processing them is also a really important part of your birth experience, because our bodies, just like any mammal, are really wired to give birth in a setting where we feel safe. Okay. I want you to think of any mammal think of us in the wild, right? If you lived in the wild and you were alone and you start to go into labor and you sense a predator, like there's a panther or something, you sense like a predator's nearby, your body's fear response goes off. The adrenaline is pumping in your body, and your body is getting the signal, it's not safe to give birth to my baby here. There's a predator nearby. What happens? Your body is so intelligent, it slows labor down. It can even stop it entirely. But the issue now is like we're not in the wild. We don't have the setting where there's a panther present, but our stress response doesn't know the difference between a panther or us being stressed about our baby's heart rate or feeling really uncomfortable in a hospital environment, right? So a big part of this, we have to do the work to understand what are our panthers, right? When we don't recognize what fears we have, right? And they can be capital F fears, like I am terrified of stillbirth, right? Or they can be lowercase fears, like I'm scared of pooping during labor. All of them are valid fears, and we need to get curious to understand where these are coming from and what actions we can take to, one, overcome them, right? When you just suppress your fear, what happens is it doesn't just go away. It might go away from your conscious mind, where you're like maybe not thinking about it as much in your conscious mind, but it goes to your subconscious. And that's where it's more dangerous, because your subconscious mind is when you start to believe, your brain believes that it's a truth, not that it's a fear. right? And so what can happen is if you haven't done the work to understand what these fears are, begin to clear them and take proactive steps to avoid them from happening so you feel more grounded about them, or simply recognize, live with, and know how to calm your nervous system when they become present, then they can really wreak havoc in your birth experience. And I think a lot of people are like, I didn't understand why my labor was stalling out. And something as a doula I do all the time is if I notice things have stalled, like there's a lot of different things that we can do. Like I always wonder, like, okay, are they nourished? Like when's the last time they had something to eat? Like are they like how hydrated are we? But a big component is unpacking, like, what's coming up for you right now? Like, what do you not have to hold on to in this moment? Or sometimes it's like a nurse was like really bad at monitoring baby's heart rate and like couldn't get baby on, but like is anxious because they think that something's wrong, but it's really like they just can't get baby on the heart rate, like the monitor. So like they're freaking out, right? And so my client freaks out, right? And that's giving that capital F fear of like, is my baby okay? Like that trigger, and they have the adrenaline go up, and your body slows things down because it's like, this is how I can keep you safe right now, right? So a big part of this is like doing some inner work and mindfulness work about fears prenatally to understand what comes up for you, but then also doing the work to understand, how do I calm my nervous system in moments of stress so that I can allow myself to release and relax, right?
Right. And then understand that, like you said, your nurse, she came with her own fear. It's like we have our own fears in the hospital. Your doctor has hit their own fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they had a bad outcome last week or last year, and they're carrying that with them. Your
Right.
nurse is going to carry. I have seen some horrific things, unfortunately, and that is ingrained in me. So now I'm coming, and if I see something similar that's happening, it may cause a little bit of panic, and maybe has nothing to do with the past, right? So now you're not only having to deal with your own fear, but now you're like, wait, now the recommendations and the interventions and just the vibe from your providers is also going to instill these fears. So
Right.
really work on it. And that's the hospital system. Unfortunately, it's we base a lot of our care on fear, right?
Right. And I think
So
fear is contagious. And
contagious
I
because you don't know.
recommend.
You said the unknown. Like, why are they scared? What do I not know? Oh my gosh! And
Right.
then
Yeah, and
yeah,
you can feel it, right? And I think
yep,
we're designed to mirror each other. Like if you notice, like if you're sitting with someone, you tend to like mirror how they're sitting, right? We mirror if someone's yelling at us, we yell back, right? If someone's whispering, our voice gets quiet and we start to listen to them talking in a quiet tone, right? We're designed to mimic what's around us, and that's the same with fear. And so while you need to unpack your fears, if you have a partner, a spouse, if someone's going to be with you in the birth space too, like they need to unpack their fears too, right?
yes, your partner. If you're the only one doing a birth class and getting the education and dealing with your own fears, and you're leaving your partner or your mom or your sister or whoever else is in your room out of it, then they are going to come with their own past traumas, with their
Mhm.
unknown fears, and then they're going to put it on you. And there can
Mhm.
be, I've seen so many times where the doctor needs to do an intervention. Let's say it's right at birth, right? Maybe let's say a manual extract, like they need to manually go in and extract the placenta because they have a fear the placenta is going to get stuck and she's going to hemorrhage, right? Because maybe that just happened to them with another patient. So they're like, I have to go in there and just do it. And you're like, wait, my birth plan was, expectant management. I want to let the placenta deliver. I don't want Pitocin right away. I'm not hemorrhaging yet, but it's been 30 minutes and they want to do it. And they're have, if you're God in their eyes and they're looking at
Mhm.
your partner, like, I need to go in there and get this out. And your partner is going to look at you and be like, let the doctor do what they need to do. And all of a sudden it's this escalated situation. And I'm sorry, but I see it constantly, and I'm sure you do too. And as people, as outsiders, we're staring at them like, this is so unnecessary. Like, can you just take a moment and listen to her? But if your partner understood birth and the third stage of labor and what the placenta does to come out, and understands your strong preferences, then they're going to be able to control their fear a little bit, look at the provider and be like, hey, we really want, like, how can we wait 5 minutes and maybe talk this through and prepare her for a manual extraction? It could be very uncomfortable. Like, have them speak up, have them put their hand out, right? And say, no, we're going to calm down. It's okay, right? But if they have no understanding of it, and that's why I am such a big advocate of having an experienced doula at your bedside, because they're going to be able to see things and calm your partner or your family or someone down before it gets too escalated and it transfers to you as a laboring person, right? So yeah, you're totally right. Fear-based care, I think it goes with the territory, unfortunately, because we do see scary things. But if we have a trust in our body and birth, and I hope, and I speak constantly with my coworkers and with doctors about like the fundamental aspects of birth and why it's not scary. And I can tell the providers that understand that and don't, and have went out and maybe worked with midwives. I have one doctor, she went to Mexico and worked with women midwives. Her presence and her, calmness in situations is just night and day compared to a doctor that hasn't, right? So get to know your provider, ask them those questions ahead of time. Like, how do you feel about natural birth? How often do you give an episiotomy, or, what is their C-section rate? It may give you a clue on how they act based on fear and how that's going to transfer to you. Get your partners involved in all of your care. And then you said something about like a hospital birth class, but the only thing I would say to that is take the other birth class, right? Take the evidence-based outside of the hospital birth class, right? Mine, yours, work with a doula, work with a birth coach like myself, whatever you want to do that. And then take that knowledge and take the hospital class, take the tour, face the fears, get to know the light, get to know the entrance, get to know the nursing station. Then take those questions that you had in your birth class and ask them in the hospital during the class, right? If they even allow that. What some are just, videos, kind of boring and just the basics.
Right.
I'm all for it. I'm like, take everything, like experience it. Like you got to kind of put yourself in the situation as much as you can. Like definitely take the tour. Definitely ask those questions. Like, is there a bath? What about fetal monitoring? Can I go inside water? Can I birth without an IV? Like, what's the culture? Like, get to date your hospital for a sec, get to know them. And the more people don't like, I don't want to know, but honestly, and I'm sure you agree, the more you get to know about your body, about birth, and about the environment that you decide to birth in, the less you're going to go into it fearful, because there's going to be less unknowns, right?
Yeah, and that's just such a good point, Colette. And I would say if anyone is neurospicy or neurodivergent, I like to say neurospicy, and you have like sensory needs, say like you really don't like bright lights or sounds are irritating to you, doing a thorough tour of the hospital and understanding what that looks like and what accommodations you might need to make that sensory experience feel better to you is also really helpful. And I think when you're able to see and visualize where you'll be, regardless of if you are neurodivergent or not, that can create a huge sense of calm in the body of knowing, oh, okay, like I know how to navigate through this space a little bit better.
My husband was so nervous about like birth, and I mean, not so nervous because he's like, well, you know what to do. You got this. But as we had to we had to do an overnight stay because I just needed fluids and watch the baby overnight. So he got a chance to be in the birth room without actually, giving birth or going through it. So he said, wow, that just made him so much more relaxed for when the time came. He knew what the room looked, just knowing what the room looks like. You know what I mean? Knowing how the nurses talk to you. And then you brought up a good point with the neurodivergency and that spectrum that you're on. We're all so different. And and then also I know you're in the queer community, so how you want to be spoken to, what you want to be called or referred as, like, right when you get there and you speak to your nurse, communicate that. Hey, listen, I have some problems with bright lights and really loud noises. What can we do to limit people coming in the room? I want to protect my privacy because I don't handle that well. I Most nurses are we're not equipped or trained in this area, right? Maybe we have a little video that we had to watch and click through and answer some questions at the end, and that's it, right? And then it's just our personal experience. And if we're having a bad day and we get someone that's highly, like, I did my part to research people with some mental health disorders, so maybe highly anxious or, on the spectrum, or anything like that. And I don't think that's the mental health, but anxiety is huge.
Yeah.
How are we going to approach that, right? Is it going to be like, oh, well, that's, tough luck? Or can you communicate and find a nurse that can like work with you better? Like, do you have anyone that has experience with this or can work with me? Like,
Yeah. And I think
right?
that's a great thing to educate your partner on too, right? When you are in triage and in the process of like getting assigned a nurse, right? Before you've been like working with someone for a long time, that can be a great way that your partner shows up as an advocate for you and saying something like, hey, my partner, whatever the client's name is, has sensory needs or has really high anxiety, or even if it's as simple as really desires an unmedicated birth, right? Like whatever key preferences you think are important, saying that those are priorities. And could we work with a nurse who specializes in that or has deep knowledge in that? Because there are some nurses that's their jam, right? Like if you want unmedicated, like there's some people who be like, "Ooh, put me in that room. Like I want to work with them." Other people would be like, "Oh my god, like like almost am always with people with epidurals. Like I don't even know, like, right?" So you'll get someone who might be a better fit if you start to share those values or share your needs, right? And your fears. Exactly. Like, and again, I think what we had talked through on my podcast is like showing up as a human, right? Like talking about and getting vulnerable and being honest about what your needs are can be really, really helpful for them to then show up for you in their best ability.
Right. Just because you don't voice it doesn't mean it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be in deep inside of you, and your subconscious, because you mentioned your subconscious. Your subconscious does play such a huge role in your labor development and your birth, right? So even though you're like, I'm safe, I'm in a hospital, I'm fine, they know what they're doing, your body into every cell of your body is me like, no. Last time I was in a hospital is because I was in a car crash, or I broke my leg or whatever. And you're like, I don't really trust my doctor because I've been on Instagram for the last 7 months listening to all these people say that the hospital is scary and then not to listen to your doctors and da-da-da. So no, even though you may in your consciousness be like, I'm safe, we got this, I'm cool, your body is going to like tighten up and not let you. And I think that's why like even cervical exams can be so painful, can be so uncomfortable, or anything of which, because your body, even though in your brain you're like, yeah, I'm ready, let's do this. And they're like, whoa. And I see them just clench up. And I'm like, I've barely touched you. Like I'm literally just on the outside. It's a body like feeling. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
your
here we
your
go.
body knows something's
Yeah.
going on. I was supporting a client who had a planned cesarean on Friday, and thankfully I was allowed in the OR. She had a really big emotional response in her process, and so I was giving her a neck rub because she was like, "Oh my god, my neck is killing me. It's so tense. Like I don't like I it's all like a Charlie horse in my neck. I don't know what's going on." And almost all the time when I am supporting a cesarean, I'm giving my clients a neck rub because there's so much tension held in the shoulders. And it was interesting because I was saying to her, this is really normal. Like there's a lot that's going on in your body right now, even if you can't feel it, right? And so your nervous system is responding to that. And sometimes it responds with tension. So let's focus on your breath. Let's release the shoulders, focus on the sensation that you feel on my hands, and focus on your breath and releasing. And the OB, while doing the surgery, was like, wow, like almost all my clients say that they have tension in their shoulders. And I've always been curious why. And it's like, yeah, it's because your nervous system knows that your body is like under surgery. Even if you're not feeling it, right? Your body might respond with tension. And so recognizing where there's tension and intentionally using your breath work, using your mindset to release that as much as possible can be a really helpful comfort measure, regardless of if you're in the OR or even if you're getting a cervical check, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
And then that brings up a point. Like our doctors and nurses, we're kind of like too close to the picture and we're kind of so hyper focused on what needs to be done or what needs to be prevented that we're not looking at you as a whole person that can make decisions and that has things that they may not even be telling us. Like I don't get a lot of people telling me that have shoulder tension, but they probably do. And I just have been so zoned into other things, all the questions I have to ask, the charting I have to do, the monitoring the fetal, the fetal monitor, that I'm not like, I do my best, but I'm we see so many different people that we kind of have to just find what works for us and treat them all the same in a sense. So then, it then becomes, unfortunately, the responsibility of the laboring person, their partners, to be like, hey, I'm not Susie over there. I'm different. Like I'm Clara, and I want to be referred to as Clara, not Mama. And I have a little bit of anxiety because of this, and this. And how can you help me in this? Like, how can we work together? And then we're like, oh, well, hi, Clara. Okay, now I know I'm going to call you by your name, and oh, you have tension, anxiety in your shoulders. Oh, so now I'm going to be way more aware of what the issues are. I always tell my patient, like, you have to tell me, like, there's so many people pleasers out there, especially when they're in labor. They're more concerned with like me having to clean up their bottom and the mess down there. I'm so sorry, and they're apologizing the whole time. And I was like, but tell me what you need. Tell me what your fears are. Tell me what you're anxious about so
Right.
that I can help you. So that's so important. Even your doctor is not going to know you from, they have hundreds of patients, right? they
Mm-hmm.
they will not prioritize or make it their responsibility to get to know each single one. It's a rare breed. I'm sure they're out there, but for the most part, just because of how the system works, it's up to you to stand to voice it and let them know who you are, right? And then especially, I want to just touch real quick before we end. And unfortunately, I didn't want to touch real quick. I wanted to make this a bigger conversation, but how can then you voice up, like, what are some of the things that maybe the nurses and doctors can learn for those that are in the queer community or neurodivergent? Like, what are some aspects that you find as being a doula and in that birth space and advocating for this group that are lacking? And that, because unfortunately it's going to be up to the patients to speak up about it and demand that, so that we learn as nurses and doctors, like, what are
Yeah.
some tips that you would give maybe the nurses and doctors to support this group?
Yeah. Well, I would say the first thing is don't assume anything, right? And this will also help translate to any care, right? But not assuming what people's roles are, right? I think a lot of times for like femme presenting lesbian couples, people assume that it's like a sister, not their wife or their spouse, right? Sometimes even for like interracial couples or for gender nonconforming folks, right? People make assumptions about what they should be calling them or even default. And I know that it's based off of like a caring thing, but you referenced this earlier and just like calling the client or patient mom or dad, when we actually don't know how parents are going to want to identify, right? Or sometimes with queer families, they are intentionally not knowing the sex of the baby, or they're intentionally not gendering the baby, and it depends on how they navigate that in different states. But sometimes even asking, are you having a girl or a boy, to a queer couple, depending on how they're navigating that or what their own gender identity is, could trigger, oh, okay, like we're kind of waiting to figure out like how we're assigning the baby, when like they don't want to be thinking about that right now. They're just focused on having their baby, right? So a lot of times that comes from a positive intention of trying to create a bond, right? When you're saying, "Oh, mama, how are you feeling?" You're trying to like, I get that that's coming from like a place of wanting to say like a word of endearment and kind of like friendliness, or trying to get to know them. Oh, are we having a boy or a girl, or is it a surprise, right? And so for folks, sometimes just saying something as simple as like, oh, do we know the sex of the baby instead of the gender of the baby, right? And asking intentionally. And I do a lot of work with my clients to say, like, be upfront about how you want to be called, and sometimes putting a sign on the door, right? Oftentimes, like, it's okay to you based off of HIPAA, you can like put the first name, you can't put like the full name or something, or you can put a sign that just refers to like birthing person, like pronouns and preferred parenting name, support person, pronouns and preferred parenting name, baby, like not assigned gender, right? Like, so those are things that can kind of help the team be aware. But I think the first step is just not assuming. Someone told me once, and this is when I was like doing a lot of like cross-cultural learning, assuming just makes an ass out of you and me, which you look at the spelling of the word. And so the more we can just be curious and maybe not go into like our defaults can be really, really helpful. And just asking folks like, hey, how would you like for me to refer to you as? Like, do you have like a preferred name or preferred pronouns that you'd like me to use when working with you? Just defaulting to asking folks that in general. And that just also identifies you as a really caring and supportive person. I know that for me, when I had my OBGYN, when I disclosed that I'm autistic, it was like the first doctor who was like, how can I provide support that's more helpful to you, knowing what your needs might be as, someone who's autistic? Like, what do you need from me, right? So again, like asking that, like, what do you need from me? How can I best support you? What are helpful things to know about you to help me support you? Those are questions you could ask any client, and folks who are queer are probably going to highlight those things. A lot of times, partners or spouses aren't treated as partners or spouses in the birthplace, and they constantly have to be asserting themselves as a rightful parent. And it can make a huge difference to have staff who are recognizing their right and the beauty of their relationship and recognizing them as a parent. And it just sounds like so basic, but it's those things that really do make a difference, because a lot of times those aren't in place.
I love that. And that was a bit of a more selfish question, I guess. And for anyone, birth workers or doctors or nurses that are listening, right? And it does go both ways, because now we're working more and more with the queer community as doctors and nurses. So just because someone enters the room and they may appear as, female, they may not, and they're your doctor, they may not go as by her or she. So asking, and I think it's just entering the space, because we're working with people that we don't know. We're working with strangers. Whether you're a patient or you're part of the healthcare team, coming together with curiosity about each other and respect, right?
Yeah.
And not living in that binary role, or coming with your own preconceived notions or your assumptions. Don't assume anything, right? Goes all ways. So I really appreciate you answering that for me. And I'm sure at a later date we can dive in a little bit more on the topic. But it's a basic, like, treat people like humans with
Yeah.
respect.
And
It
use
is basic.
Yes, and use the language they use, right? Like if you ask like how do you want to feed your baby, right? If they use the word chest feeding instead of breastfeeding, now you'll know that you need to learn like use that word with them, right? So it's starting to just listen first instead of speak first, right?
Right. And if anyone is not respecting that, if anyone is giving you a hard time, then ask for another nurse, ask for another doctor that can, because you
Mm-hmm.
deserve that. I think we all deserve that, to
Yeah.
be treated at least like humans. So
Mm-hmm.
sad.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. Well, I
Definitely.
love this conversation with you today. I think we hit so many different topics. I don't even know what I'm going to be able to title this, uh, but that's how it goes sometimes. I think we definitely touched on fear in the birth space and respect, and not assuming things when you go into birth, both as a healthcare provider and as a patient. How to prepare, how to stand up for yourself and your rights, and being responsible, and learning to be that pilot and not be scared of it. Like, it's okay. You can be the pilot, because guess what? You're going to build a whole team around you to help you fly that plane. And if you're interested in having Clara join your team and helping you fly that plane, Clara, where can we find you?
Yeah. So the best way to find me if you're on social media is at Clear Light Birth. You can also find me at clearlightbirth.com. I'm also the host of the Mindful Womb podcast, and so excited to have Colette on it as a guest as well. So you'll definitely have to check out that episode, and you can listen to the Mindful Womb wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're someone who's curious about actually diving into your fears, I do have a free fear clearing guide. So if you go to clearlightbirth.com/fear, you can get that. I have a little video that helps you unpack it and kind of take the first steps on getting curious and kind of diving into some fear clearing work to prepare for a more seamless and grounded birth experience.
Love it. I'm going to have to go check that out myself.
Yeah, yeah. But it's been such an honor to be on the podcast with you, Colette. I thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And
Likewise. Thank
yeah,
you.
I'm so grateful to be here. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. All right, Clara, we'll see you next time. Bye. All right, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode with Clara O'Rourke. Just a reminder, I was on her podcast, and you want to go check that out. And it's called the Mindful Womb Podcast. So don't miss that. Go and check it out and listen to her and all the. Oh, she's just too intelligent. Oh my God! Like I was fumbling my words because I was tired. We had spoken on, because I had recorded my episode with her right before, so I was like blah blah blah. But honestly, that was such a good episode. I enjoyed having it. I enjoyed talking to her. I think we talked for 2 hours with both of our episodes combined. So I got so much out of it. And I hope you did too. So find her, the Mindful Womb podcast. You can find her in clearlightbirth.com, or you can find her on social media at clearlightbirth. All right. Until next time, guys. Bye. Thank you for listening to My Friends a Nurse presents the Birthling Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable. Before we go, a quick reminder. The information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with your healthcare provider for any medical concerns or questions. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more people and continue to bring you great content. Until next time, stay healthy and stay informed.